Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping notes and community guidelines to mention. If you have any sound or technical issues today, please let me know in the chat box with a direct message. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording, as well as a PDF of the slideshow and a couple additional resources, are going to be sent out to everyone probably within the next week or so. We are going to be doing a brief Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to send your questions through the chat box at any time, and then we'll go through all of them at the end. And then finally, we ask that you hold each other with mutual respect, come to this space teachable, and stay engaged with our presenter throughout this program. So now I just want to share a little bit about the Documentary Heritage Preservation Services for New York. DHPSNY, as we like to call ourselves, is a collaboration between the New York State Archives and the New York State Library, with services provided by the Conservation Center for Art and Historic Artifacts. DHPSNY is a statewide program that provides free planning and education services to support the vast network of collecting institutions, such as archives, libraries, historical societies, museums, and all other organizations that safeguard and ensure access to New York's historical records and library research materials. DHPSNY services include archival needs assessments, preservation and condition surveys, strategic planning assistance, and access to a variety of educational programs, such as today's webinar. So to learn more about our services, you can visit us at dhpsny.org. And with all of that, I'm going to pass things over to Kate to get us started today.
Great, thanks, Leah. I'm excited to be here today to talk about preservation in exhibits. I'm going to share my screen. And we will present from the beginning. All right, that is just what Leah was talking about here. And I'm going to go to the first screen here. I'm actually going to take myself off video so you guys can not have to worry about watching me talking through this presentation. And I will be back on after we, hang on one sec here, after we, Leah, are we good with the video? I can't see if I'm off video or not.
You are still on video, but the biggest thing on my screen right now is your slideshow.
Oh yeah, here we go. Hang on, I just had to find my stop video. There we go. Great. Okay, so preservation in exhibits. We are going to talk today about creating budget-friendly, preservation-focused exhibitions. My name is Kate Jacus. I am the preservation specialist for DHPSNY, which means that I do preservation assessments around New York State, as well as teaching workshops and webinars like this on different preservation topics. The agenda for today, hang on here, there we go, is considering preservation when creating new exhibitions, but of course this information is also going to be helpful if you already have exhibitions in place. We are working on a technical leaflet on preservation in existing exhibitions. We'll have this available later in the spring, but today we're really going to think about exhibitions from the planning stage forward. We're going to start with my presentation, hopefully about 45 minutes. We're going to cover how small to mid-sized institutions can create effective exhibitions on a budget while keeping object preservation a priority. We'll cover planning, display options, and preservation techniques. And then, as Leah mentioned, time for Q&A at the end. And again, just put those questions in the chat and Leah will monitor those and we'll go through them at the end. All right. So exhibits, obviously, as we know, bring history and culture to life, but without careful planning, they can lead to irreversible damage to the objects in our collections. You might have seen this image floating around online. It's a display from the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, England, showing the effects of hundreds of thousands of people touching various materials. We obviously want to avoid that for our objects in our care, but we also want to work within our budgets and our resources. So today we're going to focus on balancing engaging displays with preservation. The challenge, of course, is exactly that, budget constraints versus preservation needs. Many institutions don't have the funds for custom-built cases or high-tech climate control, but that doesn't mean that preservation has to take a back seat. Some of the common challenges we see in our DHPSNY site visits and we hear about from our colleagues are likely what you know firsthand. The high costs of archival quality display materials, the environmental risks of objects being on display, having enough staff to do the preservation work needed, as well as access to and the cost of conservation work, and balancing accessibility and preservation of the objects. The goal is to make intentional, cost-effective decisions that prioritize preservation during the exhibit planning process. Let's look at how to achieve this balance. You can make smart budget allocations that prioritize preservation. You can utilize store-bought displays to creatively cut costs. Alternatively, or in conjunction with those, you can implement DIY display solutions without sacrificing object safety. And finally, you can apply best practices for preservation at the level that makes sense for your resources to maintain these collections while on display. So why does all this matter? The long-term impact of preservation-focused exhibits is important. Well-preserved objects remain available for future research, for future exhibitions, and education. Damage caused by poor display practices can lead to costly conservation treatments or irreversible loss. Institutions that prioritize preservation in exhibits gain increased credibility with donors, with the public, with granting agencies. And finally, it can lead to more sustainable collections management, reducing the need for frequent object rotation due to damage caused by being on display. Let's start with the foundation, how to plan exhibits with preservation in mind while ensuring that budgets are allocated effectively to balance cost and care. An exhibition policy is a critical part of the planning process for any museum or archive exhibit. It serves as a guiding document that ensures consistency and accountability, and of course, preservation of the objects while adhering to best practices. It provides clear expectations for how objects will be chosen, handled, and preserved. And if you don't have an exhibition policy, consider drafting one as you go through an exhibit planning process. It's certainly a document that you will use and refer to again and again. We'll have resources that we'll share, as Leah mentioned it, when we share the replay of this. And I've got some information to include about exhibition policies. Obviously, preservation is a key component of these, though, how preservation is going to be integrated into the design and execution of the exhibit. And this is going to include considerations for climate control, for handling, for lighting, for appropriate display materials, and we'll get into all of that. Along with an exhibition policy, exhibition documentation is a critical element of the planning process. Each object selected for the exhibit must carefully be documented, both to ensure its preservation during the exhibit and to maintain its historical record within the institution. These are some of the kinds of documentation you'll need to think about. Accession records, ensuring that all the objects that you have chosen for display are properly cataloged with detailed accession records. This includes descriptions, provenance, ownership information, loan agreements if you're borrowing any objects from another institution, condition reports, whether these are for your own objects or for for borrowed objects. Prior to being displayed, everything should undergo a condition assessment to record its current state. This helps identify any pre-existing damage and sets a baseline for monitoring the object's condition throughout the exhibit. Photography should be considered part of this documentation. You want to make sure you take photos of each object before it's handled or displayed. These photos should capture any distinguishing marks, labels, or conditions that might be significant for future reference about conservation, for future reference or conservation work. Conservation history. If the object has been treated at all, make sure you have a record of those conservation treatments or repairs that have been made to the object before or during its time on exhibition, and ensure the treatments are documented thoroughly, including the materials used, the techniques, and the outcome. And finally, object research. If it's done for the exhibition, in-depth research on the history, the context, the significance of the objects. It's obviously crucial for creating accurate and engaging exhibits. And it also adds to the object's record within the institution. Before planning an exhibition, institutions must assess the needs of the objects they want to display. Keep in mind that not every object is going to be exhibition ready. Some might not be able to be displayed at all, and others may need stabilization or conservation work to become suitable for display. Choosing the right object saves money on unnecessary conservation work or special enclosures. You'll want to assess condition of objects, identify which ones are stable enough for display, considering fragility, prior damage, sensitivity to light, humidity, and handling. If you're hesitant to handle something, it's likely not a good candidate for being on exhibit. Display suitability. You want to determine which objects might require special mounting, framing, or environmental controls. Loan considerations. If you're borrowing from another institution, you need to ensure you're complying with the loan agreements. They may have certain display and preservation requirements you need to follow. And rotation schedules. If objects like textiles, paper, and photographs especially are light sensitive, you want to plan for rotating them out or limited display periods altogether to prevent deterioration. And we'll talk about that more later on. I'll share some examples of assessing objects. Here, this is a dress that you could would be considering for display. The condition of this dress, the silk is too frayed, the beading is detaching. For a small, museum with limited resources, it would likely not be worth the cost of conservation. A custom mannequin, a custom mount, and the strict environmental controls really needed to preserve this dress on display. So that's an example of not choosing something for exhibition. And here's an example of assessing the suitability of displaying an original object. This is an autochrome. They were really the first kind of practical method of color photography. They usually date to about the early 20th century. They're very highly sensitive to light. Prolonged exposure to light can cause significant fading and damage to the image. So really crucial that you only display reproductions of autochromes and not the originals themselves. So again, a situation where you would choose not to display something and pick a different object. Assessing an object's suitability based on its conservation needs is another thing to consider. This is an example from the National Park Service. This donated diary, you can see the before photo on the left, had a partially detached spine, tears to the pages, and lots of accumulated surface dirt. In order to make it kind of ready for exhibit, conservators had to reattach the binding, they mended the page tears, and they reinforced the covers to prevent further damage in the future. This is great if you have the budget, but again, likely if you're a small museum or archive, this is thousands of dollars of conservation work. So best to choose something else or to reproduce pages from, a diary or something like that to put on exhibit. In your object assessment, you may find objects that are sturdy enough to be on display, but should only be out for a limited time. So you want to plan for rotating these objects out so the more vulnerable ones can return to storage after a few months. There is lots of research online about how long various types of materials should be on display and at what light levels that you can use as your guide. And I'll include some links to these in the resources. So a well-planned budget ensures that funding is allocated realistically to your exhibition. It can be helpful to break the budget into categories as you're planning and getting estimates. And you really want to prioritize essential preservation expenses first. These could include things like object conservation and preparation, cleaning, stabilization, any mount making that needs to happen, any environmental protection that has to be updated for the exhibition space, whether that's the area, the room as a whole, or specific cases. This could be UV filtering film, LED lighting, silica gel, desiccants for humidity control, things like that. You want to think about labor, staff time, any outside contractors you need to use for any parts of the process. And then always good to have a contingency fund, 10 or 15% of the budget set aside for unexpected costs that will undoubtedly occur during the process. Some of the cost-saving ideas that we'll cover today include repurposing cases or furniture for displays, using in-house expertise for DIY mounts and exhibit construction. You can source materials from both online retailers and local suppliers. You can obtain many things without paying archival supply prices, kind of from the big archival suppliers. You can seek some grant funding, you can do targeted fundraising with your local audience, or partner with other institutions to share the costs of materials. Just a few cost-saving ideas. When it comes to the actual design of a new exhibition, floor plans, whether they're sketched out by hand or if you have a document, to scale, will help you design an effective layout. It'll help guide traffic and help you visualize how you're going to group the objects. You can work in what cases or other display furniture you already have and what you might need to build or obtain. And finally, you want to begin to monitor light and climate long before installing an exhibit. The data you collect here is going to help you make decisions about what objects you can have on display. To prioritize preservation of objects while you're designing an exhibition, you want to keep in mind, first and foremost, using reproductions of paper, objects, and photographs is a very cost-effective way to preserve the originals. In either case, whether you're using originals or reproductions, you want to ensure proper mounting and object support. You want to create custom book cradles, padded supports, or slant boards that prevent stress on fragile items. You want to be sure to choose safe materials when you're designing mounts and displays. And consider using magnets actually for holding delicate works on paper or light textiles instead of adhesives or other mounting techniques. So we'll go into detail about more of these examples later in the presentation. So this is an example of a very budget-friendly display option using reproductions of photographs and documents. Here, so the originals obviously are preserved and away in storage. And you've got the reproductions mounted here. You can easily mount them. This is just with push pins, very budget-friendly way to put up a temporary exhibit display. If you're using original photos or documents, again, for a short amount of time, because they shouldn't be out permanently or for extended periods, you can give them an extra enclosure to protect them from dust and pests while they're on exhibit. In the name of budget-friendly mounts here, you can again use push pins, and though you want to make sure that they are kind of put through the enclosure only, not the actual artifact itself. This would help kind of when you're designing more vertical displays. This is a quick screenshot here from a video from the Smithsonian Archives about using magnets to mount a photograph for display. Magnets can be easily installed. They're relatively inexpensive. And then again, in the resources, I've got a few that I'll list about using magnets to mount different types of objects, kind of a unique way to deal with customizing mounts for the things you're exhibiting. This is an example actually of using magnets to attach a pair of gloves to a vertical panel. Again, they're best used for paper and small or light textiles. And finally, for the planning section here, I want to talk about timelines. The more time you give yourself, the better. Rushing leads to unavoidable damage. Really, a 6-month minimum is ideal for careful preparation. If this is your first exhibition or you're doing a major exhibition renovation, certainly plan for more time than you think you'll need. You can see the breakdown here really is a ballpark. 6+ months for research and budgeting, 3 to 6 months for design and mount making, 1 to 3 months for object preparation and installation. But of course, a lot of factors go into this, including how much staff time you have available, maybe just volunteer time even, the size of the exhibition you're planning, and more. So again, this is just a ballpark, but to help you start thinking about timelines. The key point is that giving yourself enough time is also part of the preservation strategy. Things, again, are more likely to be damaged when you're in a rush. So now that we've covered planning and budgeting, let's explore how to create budget-friendly but preservation-safe displays, including modifying store-bought solutions and some DIY techniques. This is just a nice photo here of kind of some DIY, this stand here, a kind of a folding hanging rack to display various textiles and portable kind of boards to mount exhibits on. So again, cost-effective, kind of more DIY solutions. So first we're going to look at the larger display furniture. So exhibit cases or vitrines. If you order these specifically from an archival supplier, we all know how costly they can be. On a budget though, there are other options. If you are handy or have access to a handy staff member or board member or volunteer, there are lots of instructions online for building your own display cases and stands. Again, I've got some of these listed in our resources, which you'll get. You can also repurpose old furniture, bookshelves, or retail store display cases into exhibit cases. Three things to keep in mind as you're repurposing or upcycling a piece like this. You want to make sure you're neutralizing any harmful materials. You want to ensure there's decent ventilation and some protection from light exposure. And of course, you'll be adding archival mounts and supports to display the objects inside the case. So here's an image of an acrylic display case under construction with just DIY materials and tools. Again, the link to this exact instructions is in the resources. You can see how they made this. This is an example of a retail store display case. It was acquired and now houses part of an exhibit. This case came with its own lighting system. You'll want to change out the bulbs to LED if possible to reduce UV exposure, or keep the lights on a motion sensor or timer if they can't be changed out. And best case for a display piece like this would also be to line the glass with a UV filtering film. This is an upcycled bookshelf turned into a great little display case. It's got glass shelves, lighting, and UV filtered acrylic doors that lock for security. Adding the adjustable glass shelves here means that this case is adaptable for future displays. And again, cases like this are not sealed. There's enough small gaps for airflow. And I think, yeah, I mentioned the lights were, lights should be LED in this. So you can customize a piece of furniture pretty nicely to have a preservation quality display case. This is a vintage display case that's been lined with muslin to avoid the objects being placed directly on the wooden base. You can also line shelves or bases like this with other archival materials like acid-free buffered mat board, mylar, or ethafoam. In fact, it's best to use one of these materials as a base liner, and then you can cover it with fabric that's more matched to the display. You want to choose muslin or 100% cotton fabrics that you've washed first. And you don't ever want to use felt for lining these exhibit cases. Okay, so moving on from cases, let's drill down a little bit to talk about cost-effective ways to deal with mounting the objects for display. Many times objects can simply be placed on a shelf, for display, but sometimes they'll need more support or you want to make them stand out more. Big box stores and online retailers can be great sources of lots of types of mounts and risers, other display materials. I've listed some of the search terms here that you can use to find various items. Many of these can be used without any archival modifications. So like acrylic risers or easels and coated metal stands are already made of appropriate materials. If you buy wooden stands, or fabric lined or felt lined shadow boxes, for example, you'll need to make sure the objects aren't directly touching these materials. This is just a screenshot of a quick Google search for easels, just to show you a little bit about the range of options and sellers. So pretty easy to find online. This is a common acrylic stand you can find online from various retailers. You can see, first of all, it's safe to put an original photograph right on the stand because it's acrylic. And second, it's okay to use a stand that's a little wider than needed. This mount doesn't need to be custom made. The stand is large enough to support the majority of the photo, which is critical. So it really doesn't need to be mounted on a supporting board. For extra protection, you could have put a thin mylar band around the object to secure it to the stands. But I think at this angle, it's pretty sturdy on its little easel. Here you can see materials that have been mounted to mat board supports with simple Mylar bands. So this is providing the extra support that these books and prints need so they can be displayed more upright on these store-bought and not custom at all stands. So a very cost-effective way of displaying paper materials. There are situations where it makes sense to create custom mounts for objects you're displaying. Sometimes an object is just too uniquely shaped or too fragile to use a store-bought mount. So using basic archival supplies like mat board, Mylar, Ethafoam sheets or blocks, and just DIY tools, there's lots of custom mounting objects and lots of resources or custom mounting ideas and resources online for creative solutions. So paper-based objects, as we saw on the previous slide, can easily be mounted on that mat board support, secured with a Mylar band. You can attach this to a slant board to display vertically or on those easels or risers. Mylar bands can also be used to hold open pages of books that are nestled into book cradles, which can be made from lots of different materials, corrugated board, mat board, Ethafoam wedges, for example. Smaller textiles can be gently sewn onto a padded slant board, or custom padded hangers can be created with polyester batting. And again, that washed cotton or muslin fabric. You can shape foam blocks into custom mounts for small 3D artifacts. Lots of options. So we'll go through a bunch of images here to show you some of these ideas. This is a slant board made of archival mat board for paper objects, really cut to fit the size of the object. So really custom made for that little postcard or stereo card. This is an example of a fabric covered slant board. You could use a few small unobtrusive stitches to attach a textile temporarily to this for display. This is a book cradle made from mat board. You can see the Mylar bands here holding the pages open. Again, in our resources, I'll have links to instructions for book cradles made from various materials. This is the bones of a hanging costume form. So just a regular coat hanger and some corrugated board. And you can see on the picture on the right, there's batting that is about to be added around this to add the shape. And then it'll be covered in that pre-washed fabric. This is a really easy way to display a jacket or a dress without using a full mannequin. Ethafoam rings can be used as bases for bowls or other 3D objects. You can also cover them with fabric or acid-free tissue to better match your exhibit. And this is another cradle example made of foam and topped with a piece of colored acid-free cardstock for a more vibrant display. So again, I will share resources for kind of creating some of these DIY different kinds of custom mounts. So now that we've explored some affordable display solutions, let's dive into how to ensure long-term preservation while objects are on exhibit, including environmental controls and protective enclosures. And I just want to mention this image here. This is from Manitoga. This is one of our sites, our DHPSNY preservation assessment sites from last year. And this is a great way to handle displaying some fragile, very light sensitive textile. The textiles themselves are not fragile, but they're very light sensitive, obviously. They have this muslin cover that lays over these textiles whenever the gallery is not in use. They have a specific kind of format for, they only have tours, docent-led tours in their gallery, so they know when people will be in there. So it's a little bit different than just kind of having an open, exhibit open, for the entire day, but so they know when people will be in there and they can uncover the objects. But certainly covers over exhibit cases or pieces, objects on display are a great way to reduce light exposure. Just wanted to point that out as we talk through this slide, or that intro slide here. So as we all know, light exposure to pretty much any kind of cultural heritage object eventually leads to fading, discoloration, material degradation. Again, especially true for paper, textiles, photographs, and organic materials. UV light is particularly harmful and should be eliminated in exhibits whenever possible. As mentioned before, monitoring the environment, including light levels, before installing an exhibit will help you understand the ambient light situation in the space that you're planning on exhibiting things in. And then once you're monitoring levels during the exhibition, it will help you see if your light mitigation techniques are making a difference. So some of these light mitigation techniques can be relatively inexpensive. Using LED lighting instead of fluorescent or incandescent bulbs. LED bulbs emit no UV light and they produce less heat. And they are widely available in many different sizes. Limiting light levels based on material sensitivity. Again, you'll plan for this when you're assessing objects to pick for display. And the resources I mentioned before, I'll share some information about specific light levels appropriate for different types of objects and materials. As we mentioned in the DIY section, you can add UV filtering film or acrylic to display cases, but also to windows in your exhibit space. You can use timers or motion sensors or dimmers to reduce unnecessary light exposure. And as I showed you on that slide two slides back from Manitoga, you can cover objects, cover the case or cover the objects to reduce light exposure when they're not being viewed. And of course, as we talked about before, you'll want to rotate out the most light sensitive objects periodically. 3 months is kind of a general rule of thumb, but again, it depends on how much light is in your space and what type of object you're displaying. And as I said before, monitoring light in the gallery before the exhibition is installed is really going to help you gain an understanding of the ambient light currently in that space at various times of day. It's going to help you determine exhibition design elements and object selection. And then once the exhibit is installed, you should continue to take light readings. And here's some ways to do that. You can use a light meter for spot checking. That is the image in the middle, like the handheld light meter. You can install data loggers that measure light. That's the image on the right is a data logger that is recording environmental data, but also light levels. Or at the very least, and a very inexpensive solution, are these blue wool cards that you can install in your exhibit. This one is actually front and center in an exhibit with an actual label that says light gauge and some information about why they have it there, or you can put it kind of more subtly, out of the main site of things on exhibits. This blue wool card is going to help you monitor for fading and give you an idea of when it's time to rotate objects off display. Besides managing light in the exhibition area, you'll of course also want to control temperature and humidity. As we know, fluctuations in either of these cause stress on the objects. Expanding and contracting materials like wood, paper, and textiles can be damaged. High humidity, over 60%, encourages mold and pest infestations, and too low humidity can cause brittleness and cracking, especially in paper and leather. So what can we do about this if a new HVAC system is not in the budget? You want to aim to keep the temperature and humidity as stable as possible within these general ranges here. You want to avoid placing objects near HVAC vents or doors or windows where conditions can fluctuate a little bit more drastically. And then there's things that we call passive climate control solutions that can supplement the active solutions like which is the HVAC system. So some passive solutions could include silica gel desiccant containers that you can place inside cases for humidity buffering. You can add weather stripping to any doors that lead to the outside in your exhibition area, or even on display cases to reduce outside air exchange. You can add humidifiers or standalone dehumidifiers if you need to kind of fine tune the HVAC system. And again, you'll want to be monitoring these conditions regularly with data loggers, hygrometers, or humidity strips. This is images of options for monitoring environments in exhibitions. From the simplest here on the left is a humidity indicator strip. You could use this along with whatever thermostat you have in the room and get an idea of how things are going. You can get simple digital thermometer, hygrometer units to place around the exhibition, like inside the cases or in places where, you know, they're not seen by the public. Or you can invest in data loggers for long-term and automated monitoring. So lots of different options based on your resources. You also want to think about protecting your objects on display from airborne pollutants. Some of the common risks, depending on the type of institution you're in, can be dust or soot even, or chemical pollutants. These can cause staining, corrosion, and deterioration of the objects. The cases themselves, especially if you've upcycled a piece of furniture, can be harmful. Wooden cases, adhesives, and some plastics can off-gas harmful chemicals, you know, acids, formaldehyde, VOCs, things like that, that your objects shouldn't be exposed to. And of course, pests, while they're not technically a pollutant, are a risk we want to manage with more than just environmental controls. So for display cases, using ones that you've made from or modified with archival quality materials, you want to avoid using acidic woods to make a display case, especially things like oak. Instead, use sealed MDF. Using powder coated metal or acid free boards, mat boards to line shelves or bases of vitrines. If objects are particularly fragile, you can place them inside archival enclosures inside the case as a further layer of protection and to buffer them from air exposure. And finally, you'll want to regularly clean display areas with HEPA filter vacuums. You don't ever want to use feather dusters or spray cleaners near artifacts. Vacuuming with these HEPA vacuums really cuts down on any pollutants and other dusts that pests would be attracted to. You can consider borrowing a vacuum from another institution or potentially going in together on the purchase of one with another institution. They can be expensive, but they are a great resource to have for cleaning objects and displays. So really the key takeaway here is that clean, stable air quality is going to reduce chemical degradation and keeps your objects safe from pollutants. This is an example of cleaning with a variable speed vacuum with a HEPA filter. The variable speed is important because some objects need a much more delicate suction than others. This is really the gold standard for museum cleaning objects and displays. And again, borrowing one or sharing the cost among institutions can make it feasible to have access to one of these. Safe handling is also of objects is also clearly an important part of their preservation. You always want to either wash your hands or wear gloves when handling objects. Gloves are important for photos, for metal, for leather, and for many textiles. Clean, dry hands are perfectly fine for I'm sorry, not for photos, for paper, for books, and you know, many 3D objects, glass and ceramics and wood and things like that. You want to support objects fully when you're handling them. Never lift fragile items by their handles, their edges, or books by their bindings. And then when you're moving objects around to and from the exhibits, you want to make sure you're using trays or padded carts when you're transporting objects so that they have the safest ride possible. This is just a funny image here. No gloves needed for books and paper. This is a great blog post from Smithsonian libraries, and kind of just illustrating the fact that white gloves really are no longer the gold standard for museum work. Nitrile gloves are much preferred. DHPSNY just actually posted a blog post last week about gloves and the considerations, the pros and cons for each kind of glove and when to use them. And we will add that link to that blog post in our resources. But again, for books and paper, no gloves, clean, dry hands is really the standard now. This is a typical museum cart that is super handy for transporting objects. You can get similar things from other, from regular retailers. This is just like a Rubbermaid cart. So it's nothing that is special and needs to be purchased from an archival supply place. You can get it from a big box store or industrial supplier online. I do want to talk a little bit about object security. This is another important part of preservation. We want to talk about the security of the objects kind of in the exhibition and kind of the exhibition as a whole here. So inside the cases, the objects should be secured to their mounts to prevent shifting or getting damaged, or secured to, if they're not in a mount, secured to kind of the base of the vitrine or the case with some museum wax. Cases and frames should be closed and hung securely, or closed securely or hung securely if it's a frame. Ideally locked. You can get security hardware to hang frames so that they are more secure against the wall. You want to rope off areas that have objects out in the open. We understand not everything can be in an exhibit case. So if you can kind of keep people away as much as you can from objects that are not in a case, that's important. And you want to make sure that especially if you're planning a new exhibit and a new space in your institution, that you want to have update your security kind of plan and procedures for this new space. Do you need to add security cameras? Can you make sure that staff is in view of the new exhibit space so that they can monitor people going in and out? Things like that, making sure that this new space kind of flows with your current security procedures. Here's an image again of just using ropes to prevent visitors from getting too close. Of course, this is not not ever going to prevent somebody from really going in if they wanted to touch something, but in general will keep most people at a safe distance from the objects while still being able to read labels and engage with the exhibit. And another note here, if you end up doing renovations to your space for a new exhibition, you want to be vigilant about construction safety and protecting the objects in your collection while you are doing any construction and renovation work. This is the time when so many accidents happen in museums. I think, in fact, most most museum accidents, or not, I shouldn't say most, I don't have an actual stat for that, but many times when renovations are happening, fires will start, or leaks will happen, or some other kind of disaster will happen that can affect collections. And so just be extra vigilant if you have workers around, or you're using your staff or volunteers to do renovation work. This is a really vulnerable time for the objects in your collection, whether they're on exhibit somewhere else or back in your storage areas. Just be aware and be extra safe with your construction and renovation projects. And I want to make kind of one quick note here about emergency preparedness. If you should have an emergency preparedness kind of plan for your institution in general, that includes kind of how to deal with emergencies in your exhibit and storage spaces. But importantly, if any objects on display are on your priority list for saving, you should have a list of kind of your most important objects in the museum that would be the first things you want to make sure get out, especially if somebody else, like a first responder, is getting these objects out of the museum, if they are not accessible to staff. So you should have this priority list on hand. Update that list if any of these objects go on display. You want to make sure that you provide information about how to access them. If they're in a locked exhibit case, where is the key? How do you get them out? This is information that could be helpful in kind of an emergency situation. And also, if you've got any objects you have borrowed for an exhibit in your institution, they automatically become the first priority for saving in an emergency. So they also kind of become part of your priority list temporarily. And you should, again, provide information on how to access them in an emergency. So really in summary here, I just want to reiterate that planning for preservation starts, or, preservation starts at the planning stage for exhibitions here. You can incorporate conservation-friendly materials and display strategies from the beginning. You want to prioritize spending on preservation essentials. We talked about modifying store-bought displays or using DIY mounts and supports. You want to repurpose kind of affordable materials while ensuring they meet preservation standards. We talked about controlling light exposure with LED lighting and UV filters and rotation schedules. We talked about maintaining stable temperature and humidity, and making sure that you are tracking that information, or monitoring those with data loggers, or other other readouts. You want to ensure clean air and pollutant control by using, non-off-gassing materials, and cleaning techniques. You want to practice safe handling and secure mounting to prevent physical damage. Just some of the things we talked about here, preservation-wise. So really, just even with a small budget, preservation-focused exhibits are achievable with thoughtful planning, creative solutions, and best practices in object care. So I am 46 minutes here, so I think this is great. I want to hear from you. Do you have questions? What challenges have you faced when creating exhibitions on a budget? Do you have creative solutions that you would love to share with folks? If you tried modifying store-bought display cases, what's worked for you? So I'd love to hear some information from anyone who wants to share. I'm gonna let's see, get off. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here. Oh, one more slide here. Thank you, Leah. So again, we are available to, answer your questions. Contact us if you've got questions about, preservation in general or preservation in exhibits. DHPSNY is always here as a resource for New York State institutions. Whether you want to take advantage of one of our services or just ask us a question, we can help connect you with either answers or another, organization that could help you out. So we love to chat with people. Please call us if you be in touch if you have questions. All right, stop my share. Turn on my video. Okay, great. Leah, are you gonna read the chat here if there's questions?
Yes, I am, but as of now, we don't have any. So I'm going to give folks just a minute or two in case they're typing. But in the meantime, thank you, Kate. That was a very fun presentation, very robust. So
I'm excited to share the resources. It's a website that we create using Notion, which is like the project management tool we use here at DHPSNY. So it's kind of a nice layout with lots of links, so much information I pulled together when researching this presentation about instructions for DIYing things, and really great resources from conservators about light levels and environmental controls and things. So I think it'll be a very worthwhile resource to keep on hand. And again, look for the we're going to do a technical leaflet about preservation things you can do when you already have exhibits up and running. We'll have that ready later in the spring. Question about slides? Yeah, when we'll also make these slides available. Yep.
Yep. So in about a week, you'll get a follow-up email. It will include the recording as well as a PDF of the slideshow and then all of the resources that were mentioned. Okay, so a couple of comments. One person suggests to connect, if possible, to your local art community because they tend to be very creative when it comes to ideas for creating DIY display pieces. They provide the idea and the museum can provide the adjustments to make them safe for preservation.
It's a great idea.
Really good idea. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Catherine. That's super. Great.
All right. I mean, I'm not seeing any questions, so I believe I will give you all the gift of an extra 10 minutes in your day. Thank you everyone for joining us. Keep an eye out for that recording as well as upcoming webinars and presentations that we've got going on. Again, you can keep in touch with us, pretty much all platforms. DHPSNY.org is our email. And we'll see you at the next one. Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thanks
Kate.
everyone for your time today. Take care.